This country is famous for its old coaching inns and public houses. They're dotted up and down the land at crossroads and in village high streets. And for many hundreds of years, they've been a centre of village life and a resting place for travellers moving along the old network of trunk roads. This constant ebb and flow of life in and around these old houses seems to have left an indelible imprint upon many of them. They're the focus for some of the most extraordinary and surprising stories of paranormal events that we've come across in our search. In this programme, we tell a quite remarkable story from just such a historic inn, the George, in the ancient city of Preston. Over 300 years old, steeped in history, built on the edge of an old battlefield.
We know that the pub was here for 300 years or more, but the land itself also has a tremendous history. During the Civil War, the Battle of Preston was played out just down the road, and this area was used as a mass burial ground. This has nothing to do with the gravestones that have been found on the site, because those graves would not have been marked with stones. But we do know that it was perfectly legal at the beginning of the 18th century to have your loved ones buried on your own family property, in the cellar, in the back garden, wherever. It was perfectly legal to do that, so it's not so surprising that we found gravestones here.
Over the past 5 or 6 years, the George has been through what amounts to a paranormal storm, a troubled and disturbed time that has transformed the views of the people who live and work there.
When it happens to you, you start believing that, you know, you shouldn't be so sceptical, that you should read into things, and when it does happen to you personally or your immediate family, then you do realise that you shouldn't dismiss things. I was very, very shallow by not believing, not looking into it more.
I didn't believe it, but it's like the old saying, isn't it? Seeing is believing. There's definitely something strange.
The lightning conductor of this storm of paranormal activity has been Tom, a solid, down-to-earth North Countryman, former landlord of the George before he was driven out by the hauntings. He sought help from Melanie Warren. She's an experienced and rigorous paranormal investigator, profoundly sceptical, rejecting anything that smacks of deception. She was aware of a deeply sensitive side to Tom.
Tom has had psychic experiences of one kind or another for most of his life, and I think that because he's more sensitive to things of that nature, that's why his story is much more exciting than anyone else's.
It isn't just Tom. Over the past 5 years, all kinds of weird and unexplained events have gone on in the George. Objects have materialised and disappeared right in front of people's eyes. Machines have switched themselves on and off. People have been frightened out of their wits by invisible forces that have pinned them to the wall. But many of these events have been just bizarre and whimsical, funny, rather than frightening.
A bank book, you'd leave it somewhere, that's why you knew it was important. You'd leave it in a particular place, knowing full well where it was, and you go to retrieve it and find it had gone minutes later, and begin a hunt for it because it was usually important, and find it in some, a particular room that you hadn't even visited, and obviously you blame yourself. I must have gone in there and left it. You blame the children, they must have picked it up and moved it. But some of the things were just, it happened too often to be reasoned away.
One night I came down to put some CDs on, and the CD player was here, which was a large CD player, like a jukebox, which held a lot of CDs, I'd say about 50 or more. And I got halfway down the stairs, which are here. They were slightly different than that, but basically they're in the same position and everything else as they were. CD player was here. Halfway down the stairs, the machine just started to throw everything out, literally. And instead of like straight up in the air, like you would imagine it would do, they were flying across the room, everywhere. Because I thought at the time, I hope one doesn't hit me as I'm running back up the stairs, because I thought it might be quite painful. And that was the last time I was down here, and I've never been down until today. So it still feels strange, and it's not very nice, and I'll be glad when I'm out of here, thank you.
It's like the new licensees what moved in to this pub as we was moving out. We took our old till with us to the next pub. They put the till up back over there. They hadn't even plugged it in, and I was stood there and the till was on there, and I was talking to the new landlord, and the till started working, and you know, a little piece of paper come up, and the till wasn't even plugged in. And I said to him, "You're welcome to this, mate, I'm off." And he couldn't believe it. He was absolutely gobsmacked.
But throughout all of this, a great shadow has lain over the George. The shadow of a tall, gaunt, aggressive figure, dressed in 18th century clothes, who has appeared again and again to Tom. He remembers the first appearance as keenly as if it happened yesterday.
I heard all this banging going on. This building's like 3 stories, if you will. And I heard all banging upstairs on top floor. My first initial reaction was, it's my oldest lad getting up for work, and I'm going to kill him when he comes downstairs for making so much noise. But every room, every door was opened and slammed, and you had this boom, 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 these feet, and all doors slam, slam. And I were in bed, and I got out of bed thinking, when he gets down here, he's in trouble.
Well, I was fast asleep, and the first thing I remember hearing was the dog barking, really violently, barking very angrily, not just a little woof. I sat up in bed, and Tom was in the process of following the dog through the bedroom door, down on the landing, down the steps towards the bar. At this point I was still half asleep and thought we'd been burgled. The dog and Tom's gone down to investigate someone breaking in.
When I heard him coming down the stairs, I turned around and I just saw a black shape as such moving fast, so I couldn't like pick it out, if you will. I heard this slam, and the next minute I heard another door slam, and then another door slam, and another door slam. But all the time I couldn't pick out what it was, so I shouted, you know. I said, "Alan, is that you?" I said, "I'm going to kill you. Come here, what's that racket for?" And I turned round to get a cigarette. When I turned back, there's this man stood in front of us, dressed very similar to a Quaker as such, with long black coat, one of old cravats, very dark, unshaven, very tall, you know, face. And he just turned around and said, like, "Don't ignore me," which, as you can imagine, sent a tingle right up my spine. I just went, "Ah." The dog then woke up, all his hair just stood on end, and he just shot for this man, who just glided as such, just straight out of the room.
And the next thing I remember was Tom coming back through the door and sitting heavily on the bed, and his head was in his hands, and I asked him what was the matter, and he just turned and said, "You wouldn't believe me if I told you."
The constant visits of the ghostly stranger had a powerful effect on Tom. He found himself engaged in a terrifying battle of wills. Meanwhile, his wife, who had never seen the stranger, thought he was going mad.
And still at this stage I was under the impression that Tom was having a nervous breakdown. I felt that I'm very sceptical about ghosts and didn't believe, in a sense. I knew he was upset about something, but I didn't know whether it was the ghost he was talking about or whether he was just sort of completely gone, you know, too many of the top spirits. But I did believe something was terribly wrong for him to lose all the weight and feel so badly about things.
Customers used to think I were going crazy because they could hear me shouting at him downstairs, and all they could hear was like a rumble, which was how his voice, he had a very deep voice, so it sounded like a like some type of machine going. But it was me and him having this, you know, argument. I was telling him to get out of the way, and he was saying, get out of my pub, and, you know, it just couldn't hear why.
Things got so bad that these people, who up till then had had no belief at all in anything paranormal, decided to call in a psychic medium to drive the violent spirit away.
And she went round the house and relayed things to us that made us believe she was genuine. And she decided that this spirit needed help, and that he was using Tom as a means to gain access to some help to end his suffering. As it seemed to the medium, he was suffering badly, and she didn't feel able to manage the séance, as I think it was, you call it a séance. She didn't feel able to manage it by herself and felt she needed the help of some more mediums.
Then this medium came back with two more, a young lad and a middle-aged lady. And she decided that combined they could handle what was going on.
And we all sat down, and two medium ladies were sat opposite me, and then a young gentleman who was a medium was sat next to these two ladies.
I was told to sit with my hands, with myself on my hands as such, and to keep me back against the wall. And I asked her, I said, well, why have to do this, boss? She said, because there's a chance that he will, like, come into you. And I at the time couldn't understand this, but I was just willing to do anything to try and sort it out. They went into this, well, I'm going to say like a trance meditation, whatever, and she at the same time was saying, don't you move, do not move, you know, you stay there. And then these two women took on, visually they changed a little bit, not a lot, but the voices went to children's voices.
And the young man, as I said, I'm very sceptical, but I did see something that night that I have never seen before. And this young gentleman, this young medium, was only in his mid-20s, young, clean-shaven young chap. And he sat 10 feet away from me, and I actually saw his face change before my very eyes. I really did see it. He changed from a 27-year-old young chap to someone late 40s, very dark, haggard, a beard.
He then got up to come for me. When he moved, I like got shoved right back, you know, really powerful, and all the time. And I, unbeknown to myself, I was rocking backwards and forwards like that. Then you feel like something trying to tear your back open as such, as I was rocking, you know. I was like fighting to push myself back, and whoever, whatever, were like fighting to push me forward, if you will.
And then the young chap spoke, and as he spoke, he was more or less saying, I can't cope with this, I can't handle this. And as he spoke in his own voice, the face just seemed to melt away and change back to the young man that had been sitting there. And from that point I took notice, because that was the point I believed, because the face that the chap had took on was the same face that Tom had described to me as the spirit that had been bothering him since we came into the George. So from then on I believed what he said was true.
But what happened then was the whole back wall just disappeared as such, and a cloudy effect appeared, like a swirling, if you will, from these two mediums. You just saw these shadows appear and like just walk off, and they went, and I, you know, I mean, I was gobsmacked.
I couldn't see any light, I couldn't see anything at all. And after a while, Tom looked up towards the ceiling, and the mediums looked into the same direction above the curtain, and apparently this is where the light was to them. I couldn't see anything, and this is where was the light they were asking him to walk towards, and apparently he did walk towards the light. And as I looked sideways onto Tom, he looked a lot more relaxed. He didn't look as tense. He wasn't rocking anymore, but he was crying like a baby. Tears were just rolling down his face.
But Tom and Anne had had enough. They decided to leave the George. Within a year, they'd pass it on to its present landlords, Tony and Debbie.
Now, at the time, I did contact Debbie and Tony, who are the current tenants of the pub, and I simply said, do you mind me covering the story, and have you had any experiences? And Debbie said, no, nothing's happened to us. So I had to respect that. I couldn't push her any further on that. And I assumed that, as Tom had told me, they'd had a séance and, in effect, an exorcism, that the exorcism must have worked. Although I found that a bit surprising, because in my experience exorcisms only work in about 10% of cases. They may calm it down. Often they do more harm than good. They can actually make the occurrences a lot worse. So it was no real surprise when I found out recently that things were still happening here.
Melanie turned out to be right in her analysis. It was only a few months before Tony, the new landlord, had his first encounter with this grey-faced stranger from upstairs. And a key fact is that up till then, he knew nothing about him.
A lot of little things that have gone on, I wasn't too sure whether, they could be explained until one night when I was in bed on my own. My wife was away, and I was sleeping a bit uneasily, and I'd just looked at the clock, digital clock. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was a bit restless, and while I was tossing and turning, I saw a figure in the bedroom.
And he said he thought we had burglars, so he shouted, "Who is it?" He said, and when he looked, there was this fella in black with a funny shaped hat on, collar, dicky bow, long black jacket, long gaunt face, stood at end of bed, and he said, "What do you want?" He said, and the fella just turned around and started walking out. And I said, like, "What did you do? Did you follow him?" He went, "No, I got on the covers."
The following day I explained to my wife what I'd seen, and she said, "Do you know what it is you've seen?" And I said, "Well, I don't know really." I said, "I wanted to explain to you what it looked like." And it was about 2 weeks later, we was out one night on a night out, and we bumped into Tom, previous landlord, and she called him over, and I explained to him what I'd seen, and I couldn't believe it when he said it was the exact same description as this chap he'd seen that had frightened him that night.
But the question that continued to nag away at Tom's mind was who this tortured and violent figure might be. An extraordinary clue came from something that was found in the cellar of the George during some building work. A gold ring. Tom wears it now on a chain around his neck. Inside is inscribed the name of one Robert Clay and a date, 1786. But who was Robert Clay, and what connection did he have with the George? Tom and Anne set out on a quest to find out.
We do have some important evidence in the bereavement ring that Tom found in the cellar. He found it under one of the gravestones. Now, the gravestones were too worn away for us to gain any knowledge of who might have been buried there or when, but the bereavement ring had the name Robert Clay and the date 1786. That was the year that he died. It was a bereavement ring, however. This means that it belonged to someone who had loved Robert Clay, and it was that person that was buried on that site. It wasn't Robert Clay himself. We've tried to check out the Clay family. Now, at that time, there was only one Clay family in Preston. There were other families with similar names. Clayton, for example, was a very big family, lots of family members. But there was only one Clay family. We found out that John Clay used to run the House of Correction, which, coincidence or not, was situated directly opposite the George Hotel. That I found very interesting. Unfortunately, there was no Robert in his family at that time. We've checked the records to try and find out when, if Robert was mentioned in the records at all. We know when he died. We know what age he was when he died. We can't find him in the records.
The story then came out that Robert Clay had actually killed his 2 young children here, and on research we found that 2 young children did go missing, and they were never found. Now, according to what was said in there, was that the 2 young children were actually buried in the lower cellar of this pub, which is now all concreted up.
The historian we spoke to asked us to keep him in touch with the story because he was quite interested in it. So after the séance, we went back and told him what had been said and how it had progressed. And he said to us that he wasn't surprised Robert Clay wasn't found on the census, that apparently in those days if some heinous crime was committed by a member of an eminent family, then that member of the family was written out, not only of the will, etc., but actually written off the records, and therefore it didn't ever exist.
We mustn't forget that there are several other people who've had experiences here, customers and friends of the landlords who have been here, had one experience, won't come back. Most of them didn't even want to talk about it. They wouldn't appear here today. They would rather keep it to themselves. When you're dealing with witnesses like that, you know, they're willing to talk to me in private. They don't want it publicised. Am I supposed to believe that they're not telling the truth? And when you look at Tom, you see the man's face as he's telling you the story. He's an honest bloke.
So Robert Clay's connection with the George seemed clear. 200 years ago, he'd murdered 2 children and buried them in the cellar. Had he prowled around the place ever since to guard his guilty secret?
Robert Clay was actually not protecting, but trying to make sure that nobody ever found out about it, and that is one of they thought that that might be one of the reasons why he's been the one to try and get shutter people. The previous licensees had troubles, but not to the extent that I did.
I think with a building so old that's been in use as a pub for 300 plus years must hold something other than bricks and mortar. People's lived here, they've died here, they've been born here, and it's a meeting place at the end of the day. And I think perhaps my idea is that, you know, it carries on being a meeting place for people when they've passed over, when they've died. They perhaps want to come back and visit, or it's somewhere where they've always been comfortable. And that's what a pub is. It's a meeting place for maybe not just people to meet, but spirits too.